The growing relationship between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un has been further consolidated, with North Korea reportedly deploying up to 12,000 soldiers to Russia. It's believed the troops have been sent there as reinforcements for the war in Ukraine. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, thousands of North Korean soldiers are believed to be training in Russia for combat with Ukraine. Although the Kremlin has yet to confirm the soldiers' presence, Kyiv says it has clashed with North Korean troops in the border region of Kursk. Western allies are concerned about a possible expansion of the war.
A new player in the ongoing war in Ukraine. The United States claims up to 12,000 North Korean troops are being sent to Russia. The move has sparked global concerns from G7 countries, as well as South Korea.
It is because in this war, North Korean troops are going to participate. So this increases the need for us to work together. To work together guided by common interest and shared values.
Russia hasn't confirmed the presence of these troops, but the reported deployment follows deepening military ties between Moscow and Pyongyang after President Putin visited North Korea in June. And the two leaders signed a defense pact. Last week, Putin hosted the North Korean foreign minister in Moscow.
We have no doubt that under the wise leadership of the Russian president, the Russian army and people will certainly achieve a great victory in their sacred struggle to protect the sovereign rights and security interests of their state. Until the day of victory, we will always firmly stand next to our Russian comrades.
The US says this move is a sign of Russia's growing need for support.
One of the reasons that Russia is turning to these North Korean troops is that it's desperate. Putin has been throwing more and more Russians into a meat grinder of his own making in Ukraine. Now, he's turning to North Korean troops, and that is a clear sign of weakness.
With a new US president-elect, questions loom over how much military assistance Ukraine will be given. As Russia turns to North Korea for military cooperation, will the West's resolve hold, or will shifting political ties alter the course of the war?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from Istanbul, we have Mark Kimmitt. He's a retired US Army general. From Moscow, we have Victor Olevich, lead analyst at the Centre for Actual Politics. In Manchester, we have Jihyun Park. She's a senior fellow for human security at the Centre for Asia-Pacific Strategy, and she is a North Korean defector. And I'm delighted to say here in the studio with me, we have Jim Hoare, who's a British academic and historian and a former British diplomat in Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Mark, I'll come to you first. I've read some military analysts this week saying that this move by Vladimir Putin smacks of desperation.
Well, I would be surprised if it was desperation. If you take a look at where he could get 10,000 soldiers from, he would just have to go next door to Belarus or to his southern provinces, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, so on and so forth. It reminds me of Vietnam when the United States brought the South Korean capital division into South Vietnam. And the reason was quite simple. The South Koreans were looking for combat experience for their troops, and it could very well be, and I am speculating, that this was simply a transactional relationship on the part of North Korea to get combat experience for their soldiers, none who are alive today that have ever been in actual combat.
And Mark, from a military perspective, the numbers, 10,000, is that going to make any difference?
Well, it's very interesting that they have been assigned to try to snip off that Kursk salient. I think that's probably the most logical place to put them. That is a fairly vulnerable salient that the Ukrainians have created in the north, quite far away from the front lines. They would have been of absolutely no value on the front lines. They would have just been more battlefield fodder. but they actually could have an effect on the vaunted Kursk salient, this attack into Russia. And I think it would be a great public relations coup for not only Putin, but also for Kim Jong-un if his soldiers were the ones that pushed the Ukrainians back into Ukraine.
Well, let's get the Russian view. Victor, people in the West are saying that this is a desperate move by Vladimir Putin. What do you say to that?
Well, there's no desperation at all in this. In fact, Russia has been gaining ground. Russian troops have been making significant gains in Donbass in the past few weeks. And this has been acknowledged and recognized both by Ukraine and by NATO countries. So as far as the presence of North Korean troops on Russian land, of course, the Russian government officials are neither denying this nor saying that this is happening. But we can ascertain that there is probably no smoke without fire. And if we take Western and South Korean reports of North Korean presence in Russia as a fact, then what conclusions can we possibly draw? First of all, the number of troops that has been mentioned is at a maximum 10, 11, or 12,000. So those numbers are definitely not significant enough to fundamentally change the situation on the front. That's number one. Number two, the timing of the appearance of these reports is significant too. We are in the middle of November. This is a time when weather conditions and soil conditions in the area where the fighting is taking place change in a way that becomes much less conducive to high-intensity warfare. So essentially, this is more of a signal that Moscow is attempting to send to the West than a strategic move that can or will significantly change the situation on the front line. And the signal that Russia wants to send to the West is that it wants negotiations, it wants its conditions recognized by the West, so that those negotiations can be productive. And that if the West continues, if Ukraine continues to refuse productive negotiations, then Russia has enough forces and Russia has allies that will help it sustain the war effort for a long, long time.
Thank you, Victor. Jihyun, I want to come to you. These young North Korean soldiers heading off to a war in Europe in a country they will know very little about, fighting an enemy that is not their enemy. How will people in North Korea be feeling about this? I mean, if they even know.
In North Korea, is firstly people, they never understand the word choice. So in North Korea, the age is 17. They have to join the military and 12 years serving. So when now is young soldiers, they got in Russia, but their parents, they don't know. They don't know that their children is in Russia or attend this war, because North Korea government never share about this information to families. So at the moment, many North Koreans don't know what happened in Russia and the Ukraine war, and the North Korean soldiers joined in Russia wars. So especially, there's nowadays in North Korean soldiers, they wearing the Russia uniforms and also changed the Russia ID. So we now is not recognized which one is the real North Korean soldiers or not. So parents don't know if their children died in a war, but North Korea government never telling the parents, your children died in war or not. So that is really shocking. You know that I'm also a parent, and these soldiers' age is similar my son's age. So I'm just think about that if my son is joined this war, and what happened is parents is, you know, there is could be more devastating, and also, you know, there's a painful. But in North Korea, never complained about these issues to government. If you complained something to the government, you have to send to the political prison camp, or executions could be something that, so parents can't complain at that moment, everything that.
Thanks, Jihyun. Jim, you worked in Pyongyang for 18 months. Just tell me, what will Kim Jong-un have asked of Putin in return for these 10,000 soldiers heading off to battle?
It's almost certain that it's a sort of insurance policy to tie in into a better relationship with Russia, continued better relationship with Russia, building on the contacts since the last couple of years. North Korea, because of international sanctions, needs a lot of economic assistance. It needs oil, it needs food, and needs other things as well, which it can't get as it could in the past because of the international sanctions. It gets some from China, but by sending troops to Russia, it may hope that there will be a vast increase in what the Russians supply. And not just those things, but also military technology, particularly for their ballistic missile program, perhaps also for their nuclear program. But I think that the two last speakers have also indicated that this is not going to be a game changer in any sense. I mean, in terms of the combat. To begin with, the North Korean forces have not fought since in a sort of big war since the Korean War.
So what, 70 years?
Yeah, 70 years. So none of these soldiers will have had frontline experience. Yeah. No. In the past, there have been some troops in Vietnam, or some military in Vietnam, and also some training troops in Africa with some of the guerrilla groups. But they lack any knowledge of modern warfare, which of course I think limits their usefulness. I'm not a military person, but...
Well, let's bring Mark in. Mark, from your experience of battlefields, if someone said to you, we've got 10,000 North Korean guys coming to join your unit or your battalion or whatever, what would you say? I mean, they're not going to be the best trained in the world, are they?
No, but the ones that live will be. The battlefield is fairly evolutionary. The strong survive. They aren't going to make a big difference on the battlefield. There is a term that we have in warfare called bloodying the new guys. And what that means is give them the combat experience. They haven't fought since the Korean War. They don't have the combat experience. I would expect that the vast majority of them will be killed on the battlefield. But the ones that live, the ones that have figured out how to survive that combat, they're going to be a force multiplier, not a significant force multiplier, but they will be a force multiplier of the North Korean army if and when they return.
Let's bring Victor back in. Victor, how do people in Russia feel about foreign soldiers being invited into your country? It's the first time in a century this has happened. Do Russians feel maybe a little bit embarrassed that you're having to go to North Korea to get soldiers?
Well, look, there's nothing really embarrassing for anyone in having allies. Of course, during World War II, the Soviet Union had Great Britain and the United States as its allies. In the Korean War, North Korea had Soviet pilots and Chinese infantry on its side, and the South Korean forces had Americans, the British, the Turkish, the Turks, the Turkish army, the Australians on their side. In the Vietnam War that was mentioned, there were Soviet pilots and actually North Korean pilots that helped the North Vietnamese. And of course, the South Vietnamese army was greatly assisted by American forces, Thai forces, a pretty significant number of South Korean forces, Australians, and some others. And we can see even during both Iraq wars, the first war in Iraq in 1991, Operation Desert Storm, the Americans were assisted not just by the British, they were assisted by a number of Arab armies, and even the Syrians, who are no allies of the United States, had sent a limited force, a unit, to support the operation against Iraq after Iraq invaded Kuwait. And so multilateral military forces supporting one side or the other side is a very common occurrence. It happens all the time, and it has been happening. These military alliances have been realized throughout not just the last 100 years, but even before that. We can remember the Napoleonic Wars. So there is nothing unique about the situation. There is nothing particularly embarrassing about the situation. As has been mentioned by the other guests, the North Koreans are benefiting greatly. If we are to take these reports for a fact, then the North Koreans, of course, would be getting significant assistance from Russia as far as trade is concerned, as far as other economic issues of concern to Pyongyang. And of course, if these soldiers are really present, as reports suggest, then they would be getting battlefield experience. But again, the numbers that have been mentioned by the South Korean side, the numbers that have been mentioned by leaks to the Western press, 10, 11, 12,000 soldiers are not anywhere near to being significant enough to radically change the situation on the battlefield. That's not the purpose of this.
Thanks, Victor. Jihyun, I've read that these North Korean soldiers will be paid $2,000 for every month they survive. Just paint a picture for me of what the monthly wage is in North Korea and how astronomical that money is compared to what they would have been getting had they stayed in North Korea.
In North Korea, yes, we have got law. Law is constitution is mentioned that North Korean soldiers, they get the salaries every month, but North Korea government never paid this money. So that's why when North Korean soldiers finished their military service in 12 years, and then they go to the home, but they without the money. So they didn't buy any food or something like that. So sometimes they died on the train, on the road. So that is a real situation in North Korea. So North Korean soldiers kind of modern slavery. So North Korean soldiers never get their payments. That payment is only handed to Kim Jong-un. Yeah.
Jihyun, you defected from North Korea and now obviously live in the United Kingdom. Do you think there's any prospect some of these young North Korean soldiers, instead of fighting, will just simply put their hands up and say, we want to defect and move to the West?
But they could be not. The reasons that they don't know that is international law. If they is the prisoner of war, and what means they didn't know that everything is this law. So they could be not. And also this is not only personal issues. Their family is still in North Korea. So if this one person, I was the North Korean defector, I wanted to see escape the military, and also I want to go to the freedom countries, but their family in North Korea, they have to executions or send to political prison camps. Not only families, they 3 generations. So they could be not say something worse.
Jihyun, I want to bring Jim back in. Jim, on that point, I mean, that's a very good point, isn't it? That you have all these North Korean soldiers, and while some of them will probably be tempted to defect to the West, there's families back home, and that is a very significant kind of weight that they have.
It hasn't stopped other people defecting. I mean, some people have left, and they have left family behind them. And as Jihyun says, some of those families have certainly been executed or otherwise punished. I think that probably despite what Jihyun says, that the soldiers will get some payment from being in Russia. Certainly with other North Koreans who have gone abroad to work, whether it's in the Middle East or in the restaurants that the North Koreans operate, that we know that people get some of their salary. They don't get it all.
Not all of
so
it.
The government does take a big cut. I just wanted to say a couple of things about the North Korean military. I mean, one of the things that sometimes the North Koreans have a huge military force, 1.3 million, with 600,000 reservists. But the North Korean military has suffered, as other people have suffered in North Korea, from the famine years of the 1990s. And there's still evidence that they don't live very well, ordinary soldiers. So now it may be that what has gone to Russia are elite troops who may be more favored than the majority of troops. But there are plenty of stories about North Korean soldiers robbing local farms.
For food?
For food. I read something the other day that 2 soldiers had been arrested because they had stopped people returning from foraging in the hills for berries and acorns and things like that and taken them. And they were actually punished. Probably
desperate stuff.
Yeah,
I want to get back to Mark. Mark, how concerned are you about this growing relationship then between Russia and North Korea?
My major concern about it is affected on the Korean Peninsula. I think it does have an opportunity to destabilize this stalemate that we've had between North Korea and South Korea since the end of the Korean War. It is clear that Kim Jong-un and the family does have access to nuclear weapons. We feel that those mostly have to do with defensive purposes. They have no desire to attack Seoul with nuclear weapons. But it's been brought out in this conversation. These soldiers and their officers have no combat experience. And for that matter, neither have the South Koreans. So when you get a cadre of soldiers back from the battlefield and integrate them into your regular military, that can increase the capability of that regular military, even if 4 out of 5 of them are killed on the battlefield. So I think perceptually there will be a concern by the South Koreans, but I don't think that there'll be any concerns beyond that.
Thanks, Mark. Final point to Victor. Victor, Vladimir Putin said this special operation, as he called it, would last a matter of days. We are now heading into the 3rd winter of the war in Ukraine. At what point do you think we will see people sitting down and discussing a peace deal?
As far as Russia's positions on negotiations, Russia would have liked to negotiate an agreement on the future of Ukraine even before this military operation started. Russia is open to negotiations at any time when it will see a constructive mood both in the West, mainly in the United States, and in Ukraine. Of course, there are some in Russia that hope that the incoming Trump administration is going to have a different view on this conflict than the current sitting president, than the Biden administration. Of course, we know from 2016 to 2020, when Trump was already president, those hopes were up too, and an agreement did not materialize. In fact, Russian-American relations at that time deteriorated further, and we know what happened next. But there are hopes in Russia that eventually Washington and its allies, its European allies, and Kyiv will come to the conclusion that reaching an agreement with Russia is much better for everyone involved than keeping on arming Ukraine and fighting. And of course, Russia expects its concerns, its security concerns, as far as the future of Ukraine to be respected. So in Russia's view, the minimum is for Ukraine to permanently remain a neutral country, to never become a member of NATO that Russia sees as a belligerent bloc. And there are other conditions as far as the rights of the Russian speakers in Ukraine and other issues that are to be discussed. But for those negotiations to start, Russia has to be invited to the negotiating table, and those negotiations have to be direct. There has to be, Russia is waiting for the United States to recognize that this is in the best interests of everybody. Russia really does not want to fight NATO. Russia does not want direct confrontation with the United States or with the Europeans. Russia wants to resolve this through diplomacy. It wants this to end as soon as possible, but also it wants to reach the goals that it set for the future of Ukraine.
Victor, Mark, Jihyun, and Jim here with me in the studio. Thank you all so much for your insight on this one. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.